Heads up to the listeners of the Browns Nation station. If you are looking to show your Browns Nation pride, look no further than brownsnationswag.com. They have all the latest and best fan gear to represent your team. Again, that's brownsnationswag.com. Cue the music. It's time to start the show. Welcome to the Browns Nation station. I'm your host, joined today by fellow brownsnation.com colleague, Steven Kubitza. And Steven, we're recording this in the aftermath of the Browns' 10-7 win over the Houston Texans. And Steven, I really think this afternoon's game, it was the dueling banjos routine between Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. And I really think both of their performances helped lead the Browns to victory this afternoon.
Yeah, it was definitely the only way they were going to win. I live about 20 minutes east of the stadium, and the weather was just horrific. Once you saw that it was delayed, and the weather that rolled through, it's like they better not try to throw the ball. Even though when Baker did throw it, he actually did play well today. But yeah, it was great to see the duo finally work together on the ground.
And getting Chubb back from injury in today's game, Wyatt Teller, the right guard for the Browns, Austin Hooper, also back in the lineup for Cleveland. And Chubb and Hunt, Nick Chubb had 126 yards. Kareem Hunt had 104. They became the first Browns teammates to each rush for 100 yards in a game since Leroy Kelly and Ernie Green in October 1966. So it's been quite some time since the Browns have had two 100-yard rushers in the same game, and that duo got going early and often. And you know what? I know we usually get into good call, bad call, but I want to get into the good call early on, Stephen. Nick Chubb's wherewithal to run out of bounds after getting the first down late in the fourth quarter, and that allowed the Browns to down it twice, run out the clock, and 10-7 doesn't look quite as good as another touchdown would have for the Browns, but that way there's no way Houston can come back. There's no way the Texans can get the ball back with a little bit of time left, and that helped put the game away. But I thought it was such a savvy play by Chubb.
Yeah, it was obviously the right play, the unselfish play. There's plenty of funny factors to it, including bettors who had the Browns -4, fantasy football players, but it once again proves that the players in the field don't care about that stuff. And I'm curious if they'll ask Chubb about it in the post game, if what happened with Todd Gurley in Atlanta maybe where Todd Gurley fell into the end zone, Atlanta ends up losing. If maybe running backs around the league kind of got a nice reminder that, hey, if you could run out the clock or, not get that touchdown, just do it. Let your team win. That's the most important thing.
And remember, Chubb and Gurley were teammates at the University of Georgia, so they actually played together. They were college teammates back in the day. Stephen, I think you bring up a great point today about the weather as well. We knew coming into today's game that weather would play a factor. There was a 90% chance of precipitation of some type. This game got delayed by 30 minutes to start the game, and so it pushed the game back. I believe kickoff was about 1:37 in the afternoon, and so you didn't get quite that 1 o'clock kickoff. But once you knew weather was going to be a factor, and early on in this game, I mean, in the first half, it was like watching paint dry on the wall, but points were a premium in this one.
Yeah, it was brutal, and it's kind of frustrating, with the weather they had against the Raiders, and then they come back and the weather's like this again. But like you said, the first half, there's a lot of takes on Twitter about how people are like, the Browns need a dome or something. But, maybe it's not like this every year, every Sunday in the fall, but definitely the weather was going to be a factor once that delay came in. And I don't try to, spread too much anecdotal evidence, but seeing the weather come through where I live, like I said, 20 minutes east of the stadium, I was like, it wasn't even safe to be outside, honestly. There was power lines down everywhere. So it was obviously going to play a huge factor. And I'm just glad that they kind of flipped the script from that Raiders game and kind of learned from how to play in that weather.
You got to kind of imagine, though, how much a dome would cost to actually pay for and finance.
Yeah.
But then secondly, if the Browns can use that to their advantage, I can't think of a better running back duo in the NFL. And getting Nick Chubb back, you saw how important that was for this Cleveland offense today. And it helps keep Kareem Hunt even fresher to where he can be more productive in the touches that he gets. And so, My hat's off to Kevin Stefanski and this offensive coaching staff for being able to utilize both of those players and get them both their touches because, in my opinion, they're the two most talented skill possession players on this Browns team.
Yeah, like you just said, having both of them out there completely changes the offense. Hunt's no longer the lead back. Wrote about that on Browns Nation this past week, just about how Chubb coming back. I mean, we look at his final stats. He did have the 126 yards thanks to that 59-yard touchdown or 59-yard run where he didn't score the touchdown. But just overall on the day, it was very nice to see Kareem Hunt hitting the hole hard. Wyatt Teller being back obviously helped a ton, which they brought up on the broadcast, but I think that was arguably just as important as Chubb coming back. But we finally get to see the offense how it's supposed to be. In the running game, at least. Beckham's not out there, but with Chubb and Hunt together, we got to see what it looks like against the league's worst run defense, but it was a good sign. And, it was the league's worst run defense, but it was in terrible weather, so it kind of balanced itself out.
I was happy the Browns got their running game back on track today. 231 yards on the ground in dominating time of possession. The Browns had the ball for more than 33 minutes in this one. And so, again, at the end, it's too little too late for the Texans. I do feel bad for Deshaun Watson because he's going full one-man band for Houston. He can't throw to himself. But at the same time, you saw the importance of establishing the run, especially when you knew weather conditions were going to be a factor. And with weather conditions being a factor, the Texans kicker missed a 46-yard field goal in this game. And if conditions had been right, you're talking about a different circumstance at the end of today's game in the sense that, okay, instead of the Browns being up by 3, maybe you have a tie ball game. And so, credit the Browns for, okay, they give up the touchdown at the end. I would have liked to see a shutout. But again, going back to your bread and butter, what the strength of this team is, and that is running the ball. Once you establish the run, the passing game will open up. And it might not be today. I know a lot of people are critical of Baker Mayfield's play. But again, I think weather conditions certainly contributed to that. And it's not as if Deshaun Watson put up a ton of points either. The weather was a huge, huge factor in today's game. And if you're watching the game and you're not in the Cleveland area, that might not come across. So if you're a Browns fan not in that area, I mean, Steven, you have a perfect example of that, of how that really played a huge factor in today's game.
Yeah, one point about, I like what you said with Deshaun Watson kind of being a one-man band. Relating it to the weather, the Texans only had Duke Johnson run the ball 14 times, and Watson ran it 8 times. So really you're looking at this game and you're going, what was their game plan? They saw what the weather was going to be. I mean, the Browns defensive front is talented, but you have Watson, he's thrown it 30 times, only ends up with 163 yards. David Johnson's out, and that was their big trade this offseason. They send one of the best receivers in football to Arizona. So that whole team is just a mess. And it's kind of what the Browns used to be. You see teams going through those similar situations, and it was nice to see the flip side of that, where you're the team that comes out on top. People critical of Baker, if you look at his stats the past 2 weeks and say, well, why doesn't he, repeat that 5 touchdown performance against the Bengals? All you have to do is have any analyst come stand out in that weather and go, oh, you can't even throw a football 10 yards. It's just, you can't even hold on to the football. I mean, there was the snap from Treader when the Browns, the first drive of the game, they march down the field and Treader just slides it on the wet grass and they get the huge loss in the intentional grounding. You can't criticize it if you're not here. And the Texans seemed a bit unprepared.
Yeah, Duke Johnson, the former Browns running back, getting the start for the Texans in this one. I'm glad you mentioned Romeo Crennel and his clock management, which we can get into now. I know they said during the broadcast that the Texans were considering bringing him back. He is now the interim head coach, filling in for since fired head coach Bill O'Brien. And I'll say this, I don't see any way where that would be a smart decision for the Texans. He's 73 years old. And at the end of the game, where I would argue that he mismanaged his timeouts in the second half, it's as if he thought that the first half timeouts that he didn't use rolled over into the second half, which they don't. And it was just something that drives me absolutely nuts when I see coaches not use any of their timeouts in the first half, not issue a challenge to where, okay, maybe you don't get the challenge and your team is charged a timeout. At least use the timeouts that you're given. They're given to you. And so in the first half, that made no sense. In this first half, you have a 3-0 game, which was the lowest scoring first half of any NFL game thus far this season. And it was just like, oh man, I hope we get some excitement in the second half. And so it did pick up a little bit in the fourth quarter, but I'm not going to lie to you, Steven. I almost fell asleep watching this one just because it was just so dismal early on in the first half of this one. But with Crennel, I don't think it would be smart if the Texans bring him back. Again, 73 years old. And at the end of the game with the timeouts, that made no sense. And it made no sense not to use any of his timeouts in the first half. You can't have that for your head coach. And this is no knock on Romeo Crennel, a longtime NFL coach. But there are some guys who are better cut out to be assistant coaches, position coaches, versus being head coaches. And with Crennel, with his experience as a head coach with the Browns back in the day, with the Chiefs nearly 10 years ago, he is 30-59 as a head coach now. So look, we've had a big enough sample size to know what he brings to the table as a head coach. I do not think it would be wise for the Texans to bring him back and make him the permanent head coach beyond this season.
Yeah, I completely agree. I heard one theory that the Texans were maybe considering keeping him because this offseason might be different where you can't do as many face-to-face interviews, but that would be an insane excuse, I think. You'll be able to, even if you only Zoom or do Zoom meetings, I mean, you could still talk to people really extensively that way. That's just the way of the world this year and likely into early next year. But like you said, he seems like, I mean, he's a great guy, but just calling that timeout on the fourth down where the Browns lined up, pretty obviously to try to draw the Texans off sides. There was no way they were going to, I was like, they're not going to go for this at the 50. And then Crennel burns a timeout, and that was essentially a huge victory for the Browns. And I'm sure Kevin Stefanski almost was maybe laughing to himself, like, I can't believe that worked. But yeah, it's the true sign of someone who's not really prepped to be a head coach when they just mismanage the clock, mismanage their timeouts, go into the fourth quarter trailing, and you don't have – he only had one timeout with about 9 minutes left, I think it was. So you could see it coming. You're like, you know, the Texans are just going to end up running out of time. The Browns had that crucial 3rd and 1. Kareem Hunt gets the first down. It's over for the Texans with a few minutes left. So, yeah, that team's a mess, and I don't see any logical reason to keep him, but that team hasn't really been dealing with logic the past 6-7 years, so who knows what they'll do.
And a lot of people are saying, well, Deshaun's having his best season statistically if you really dig into the stats without Hopkins, and he's trying to do everything himself. It's not your best season if you're 2-7 as a football team. It's not. It's not. And so would you say that timeout the Texans had, that the Browns lined up around midfield and on fourth down, and it was like, oh my gosh, what is Stefanski doing? And it was like, it was a clear attempt to try to draw the other team off sides, draw the Texans offside. Would you say that was your bad call for today's game?
It has to be, because at first I would have said it was the bad call if they went for it and didn't get it.
Right?
But as soon as he called timeout, I was like, what is he doing? Like, at least let them take the delay of game. Like, your team of NFL defenders knows what's happening. They're not going to jump. Or sometimes they will, but they shouldn't jump. And him calling a timeout only for the Browns to bring out the punt team, I hope he realized in the moment that that was a terrible decision. Obviously, you're on the sidelines. Things are moving fast. The clock's running down. You're not sure what's going on. But any head coach just has to be telling his defensive captain on the field, just be calm, don't jump. But the Browns luckily didn't really have a bad call, so that's got to be the one for me for the game.
And I would ask, if I were in the post-game news conferences, whose decision was that to call the timeout in that situation, if not Crennel, whether another coach or another player? But that was huge. And again, it cost his team at the very end of the game. And again, I go back to in the first half where the Texans go into the locker room with all 3 timeouts, Watson's like laughing on the field because the Browns did use their timeouts, maybe to try to force a fumble. That was I kind of scratched my head because the Browns didn't have enough timeouts to try to get the ball back. There wasn't enough time at that point. At the same time, through 3/4 of this game, like the highlight of it was that pigeon on the field at First Energy Stadium. Like it was like, what am I watching through 3/4 in this one? Because through 3/4, the Browns led 3-0. And it was just like, what is going on right now?
Yeah, it's like I said, it was like the Raiders game, and then we get it back-to-back weeks after the bye. It was just bad football, but it reminds me of games in the past where it's a blizzard, and you realize after the first few minutes, okay, they're going to have to win 10-3, 10-7. Like when they were up 3-0, I thought to myself, if they can go up 10-0, there's no way the Texans are going to score 10 points. Obviously, at the end, they got close to doing so, but it was just one of those days where, like you said, the pigeons, the highlights, seeing the waves on Lake Erie when they showed in the broadcast was like the most exciting thing in the first quarter. So I'm just happy they won. I know all Browns fans are. And at the end of the season, you're not going to look back and go, well, two of those, or, one or two of those wins was ugly. So I'll have to take it based on the past 20 years of Brown seasons.
I've got to give Kevin Stefanski and this staff a ton of credit too, because coming off a bye week, getting a lot of players back from injury, which we already outlined, Baker Mayfield was placed on the COVID-19 list at the perfect time during the bye week. Now, he never actually got COVID. He was exposed to a staffer who was, but he had to miss some time to where he couldn't be at the practice facility. On Friday, the Browns had to close their facility, so Mayfield wasn't back until Wednesday. The facility had to close on Friday because a player tested positive. And again, we mentioned the factor that weather played in this one. And so to stick that out through all those factors, we knew going into the season some of the complications that there were going to be because of the pandemic. And the Browns were able to find a way today. And really, that's the main thing that I'll take away from this one was, especially when you factor in the weather and all of those complications with COVID-19, finding a way to win, whether it's winning ugly, it's like at the end of the day, who really cares how they won? It's that they won. And the Browns improved to 6-3 for the first time since the 2014 season. So I just have to mention that because I thought the coaching staff did a great job in terms of the preparation, in terms of everything that needed to be accomplished today, given all the complications that there were.
Yeah, and building on that, I think a lot of national analysis is completely ignoring the fact of all the, repercussions of COVID. They'll ignore the fact that the whole week of meetings was on Zoom, or that Baker, came off the list Wednesday. They had that thing Friday. It's like with the New England Patriots, I think is a great example of, COVID really rocked them. They lost Cam Newton for a bit of time. And you can't treat teams like that the same way as you would during a normal season. So the Browns come out, even if they lose the game, you can't treat it the same way as if there was normal preparation, adding in the weather and everything. So like you said, Kevin Stefanski is, easily the best coach they've had since Bill Belichick. So, and he seems very calm, perfect for the situation with COVID going on. He's not, really his only bad call of the year was calling a fake punt in week 1, I'd say. So he's moved on from that, and it's very refreshing.
And he's only 38 years old. So he's still very, very young. And yeah, other than that fake punt, I'm trying to rack my brain of something that he did that I'm just like, well, that wasn't the right decision. I'll say this. I think some fans might think he runs the ball too often, but if you're able to get 200 plus yards on the ground consistently with Chubb and Hunt, I would do the same thing because that's effective. You control the clock, you keep your offense on the field, you tire out the opposing team's defense, and you keep your defense off of the field. And so a lot of fans might point to that, say, oh, well, let's just let Baker let it rip and prove why he was the number 1 overall pick. You don't always need that. Again, we mentioned the weather in today's game, but to be successful in the NFL, and especially if this team is going to make the playoffs and maybe win a playoff game, in those big games, different teams play with different styles, and you have to find different ways to win. And I think we're seeing that thus far in the Kevin Stefanski era. And if we only have one criticism of him with that fake punt in week 1 against Baltimore, for a first-year head coach, we're talking about a guy who, if he leads the Browns to the playoffs for the first time since the 2002 season, he's going to be up there for NFL Coach of the Year, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And like you said, there's really no things you could think of that are negative aside from that fake punt. And anytime he runs kind of a gadget play, it's part of the offense where maybe you have a receiver going in motion and there's some misdirection, which the Chiefs do all the time, the Packers do. So everything, if a play blows up in the backfield, it's not because he's trying something crazy. It's just part of the offense, and maybe the defense knows it's coming. So like you said, if he wins a playoff game in his first year, I mean, he'll be looked at as, the savior in town. And with the comment of, the criticism of him running the ball too much, as some people think, that's the only way you're going to open up the passing game. It's not like we have the Browns have like a New Orleans Saints style, 8-yard pass offense with Michael Thomas. So it worked in Minnesota. His style did. He's able to take quarterbacks who aren't, top 5 in the league, make them look much better. And if Baker's throwing for 200 yards a week, even in normal weather, and the Browns are running for 150 or 200 yards, there's no reason to complain.
I can't believe we're almost 20 minutes into this podcast, Steven, here on the Browns Nation station, and we have not yet mentioned Myles Garrett and the impact that he has had for the Browns. He has to also be up there for Defensive Player of the Year because this guy is an absolute game wrecker. He only got credit for that half the sack on Watson early on in the game, but he was everywhere for the Browns, and I thought he was key in limiting the Texans to 7 points this afternoon.
Yeah, I was honestly laughing when he got that half sack, which was close to being a full one, because it was on Laramie Tunsil, and you're thinking of Texans fans going, we sent a first and a second to Miami. And early in the game, our supposed star left tackle he barely touched Garrett. Garrett does, he lines up deep outside or far outside the tackle and just gets right underneath them, perfect leverage and everything. And Texans fans have to be wondering, what the heck is going on? But that's a Bill O'Brien problem. But yeah, he was all over the place today. And it's just fun to watch. It's fun because you think when you want, top picks, we want that, top quarterback or a star, receiver or something. But taking Garrett number 1 is definitely panned out. And it's fun to see a defensive game wrecker like him, like peak Khalil Mack, just where you can't stop them. There's really no way to stop them when they get the proper leverage or hand fighting.
It's like art in seeing Garrett go up against Tunsil, who is a very good offensive tackle in his own right. It's just art to watch Myles Garrett rush the passer. It is truly a privilege, and it's something where when I'm watching the Browns on defense, I'm always, okay, where's Myles Garrett lined up? Because that's the matchup I want to watch, whether it's one-on-one, which if you're running a passing play and you want to go one-on-one with your tackle with Myles Garrett, good luck. I know this is something that Romeo Crennel did discuss earlier in the week during his sessions with media members, in the sense that he said, there's a lot of things that we can do to try to slow Garrett down, whether that's shifting the line to his side, whether that's chipping him with a running back, or maybe even keeping a tight end to help block, help the offensive tackle to where, it's not just one guy going up against him. And it's funny you mention all of the draft picks that the Texans traded, that Bill O'Brien traded away as not only the head coach, but the general manager of their team. Maybe that's the case in keeping Romeo Crennel in Houston, to where he's really just the guy weathering the storm, because the cupboard is bare in Houston. It's not like they have draft picks to rebuild. Now the fact that they are now 2-7, it's not like any of the draft picks that they would normally get if they were that bad. They traded them all away. So maybe that's the case in keeping Crennel, to where he kind of just oversees things until, all of those, they get those draft picks back in future years. But I tell you what, Deshaun Watson, you see what his talent is, and it's really a shame that that's just going to be wasted away because he doesn't really have a whole lot around him.
Yeah, like I've said several times, that team's a disaster. Trading DeAndre Hopkins, forget the picks for Tunsil. trading away DeAndre Hopkins made no sense. Bill O'Brien was already had one foot out the door. They probably knew they were going to fire him if things got off to a slow start. They let him make that move. And like you said, maybe they just keep Crennel there, kind of, hey, we're going to lose. We don't have these draft picks. We're not going to bring someone in and have them just get off to a 2-14 start or something. But it's unfortunate to see someone like Watson, who's so talented, kind of wasting years. Browns fans are used to seeing similar situations with players, but this was, I think, a perfect example of the Browns taking down teams they should take down, which hasn't always happened in the past. And we're now able to look post-game and say, wow, look how much of a mess the Texans are. And with the Browns, there's only positives. So it's a nice change.
I'm glad you mentioned that because the Browns, the final line going into this one is the Browns were favored by 4.5. And I know you mentioned, we're talking about what a savvy play it was for Chubb to go out of bounds so that the Browns could down it twice and run out the clock. But it just goes to show you that you've got to win the games you're supposed to win. And this was one of them this afternoon. A few other plays I wanted to go over, Steven, before we sign off here. Early in the first half, Jarvis Landry had that first down, and he got flagged for spiking the ball. Just the situation of that, and the Browns are deep in their own territory. It's like, dude, sweet, you got the first down, but you can't afford to give back any more yardage because you got to play the field position game. That was one. Late in the fourth quarter when Watson led the Texans to their lone scoring drive, he had that 29-yard completion to Randall Cobb on 3rd and 6. And safety Ronnie Harrison had Watson by the ankles, and somehow Watson just chucked it downfield and completed the pass. That ended up leading to a touchdown on that drive. It shows you Watson's talent and what he's able to do and to create plays. I mean, that's not a scripted play. That's just kind of the razzle dazzle of Deshaun Watson. But I thought that could have been a huge play if the Browns didn't close it out on their final offensive drive. I was really nervous headed into that last drive because I'm thinking, okay, if the Browns go too vanilla and they just hand it off to Chubb or Hunt, and then they have to punt the ball back to Houston, I don't want to see what Watson can do on a potential game-tying or game-scoring drive.
Yeah, starting with the Landry play, at first I thought it was called just for him staring down the defender, and I got mad. Then they showed the replay where he spiked it, and I went, I don't even know what to say. It's just, you just got to be smarter than that. I understand the emotion of the game, but the refs are going to call it if you spike the ball. You just can't do that. So, I mean, you could say the coaches are going to give him a chat about it, which I'm sure they did, but he's just got to be smarter, just have situational awareness. And as for that Watson pass where he was whipped around and threw it, the completion, at that moment, I was starting to get worried. I was like, I've seen this whole thing happen too many times. But, I mean, credit to him. That proves, why the Texans aren't, looking like the New York Jets this year, because he's keeping them, at least competitive. But I got scared at that moment, but at the same time, you go, well, he completed that pass, but it's not like he was consistently doing that all day. It was a lucky play. Luckily, the Browns defense only gave up that one score. So plenty of situations throughout the game where you say same old Browns, different outcome this time. So I'm happy.
Imagine how bad the Texans would be without Watson. That's really how you have to think about that, because a good quarterback can mask a team's deficiencies time and time and time again. So probably even worse than 2-7 without the efforts of Deshaun Watson. At least that's what I think there. A few other plays I want to get to before we sign off here. I thought the intentional grounding penalty on Baker Mayfield on the Browns opening drive, where they came away with 3 points on Cody Parkey's 41-yard field goal, thought it was a good call. And Mayfield was outside the tackle box on a broken play, but he did not get the ball back to the line of scrimmage. And so I actually credit Mayfield for making that play, because that was the smart decision to make, because if he is able to get the ball back to the line of scrimmage, you're then dealing with a 4th and 1 situation to where maybe the Browns go for it there. But again, he had nothing there. And so to try to salvage the play and play the next down, I thought was a really smart play. Again, the Browns did come away with 3 points on that one. And then also I thought that the Texans pooch punt, where it looked like they were going to line up for a 48-yard field goal attempt, and they pooch punt it and pin the Browns deep in their own territory as well. It's those kind of plays where you got to be creative. Again, the weather was a factor today, so I actually really liked that play from the Texans standpoint in pinning the Browns deep in their own territory.
So funny thing with that intentional grounding, I'm sure a lot of viewers in Northeast Ohio had the same problem I did. There was a weather warning on Fox, the Fox 8 local affiliate, where they cut out the sound. So I watched the play happen, but you can't hear what the announcers are saying. So I'm sitting there going, I see Stefanski yelling, Baker yelling. I go, I'm pretty sure that's grounding because it didn't get past the line of scrimmage. So, but then I see everyone yelling, and I was terribly confused. Wasn't sure what was going on, but it was a good save of a potentially bad situation. And the fact they got that field goal, huge in the game. You know, if they don't get that there, you completely blow a great opening drive. But it was a lot of confusion. There was tornado warnings going off. Everything was happening, and I was like, this doesn't seem like the most important thing right now, but I really wish I knew it was happening right now. But like you said, savvy play, terrible snap, likely due to the weather. But luckily it didn't, force a negative outcome in the game. And as for the pooch punt by the Texans, when they lined up for that field goal, I was like, Romeo Crennel has gone crazy. I cannot believe he's going to kick this right now. And they snapped it to the kicker, and I yelled, like, well, what's going on? And then he punted. I was like, oh, okay. It was just a lot of confusion from me. I was like, there's no way. Because after seeing the Raiders 2 weeks ago, where the one kick went like 20 yards left, I'm almost glad he pooched it, because I'm like, Romeo, come on. You can't be doing stuff like this.
Well, even Dick Stockton, the announcer on Fox, was confused because all of a sudden it's a fake. No, it's a punt. So you weren't the only one confused there. I do want to go back to the play with Mayfield, though, and the intentional grounding. It's that kind of play that doesn't show up in a box score, but is absolutely vital to winning and losing football games. And a close game like today, a one-possession game like today, that can be the difference between winning and losing. And again, that play is not going to show up in the box score for Baker Mayfield, because a lot of fans will just look at it and say, 12 of 20, 132 yards, no touchdowns, no picks. Great for the number one overall pick. That's not what was required to win today's game. So it's a very, very small thing. But again, in a game where weather plays a huge factor, points are a premium, at least making sure the Browns don't turn the ball over there, or to where it could have been completely disastrous. It was a smart play. Didn't quite execute it all the way to where he threw the ball away. I honestly think that the Browns might have gone for it if he were to have successfully gotten rid of it and back to the line of scrimmage, because you've got a 4th and 1 there. And in a game where the Texans' run defense isn't all that great and the Browns rip off 231 yards in that one, I probably hand the ball off there on 4th and 1 and see if I can punch it in, convert the 4th down, and maybe even punch it in for the score either on that play or on that drive. But after the intentional grounding, okay, we'll get 3 here. And to get 3 here was huge, especially with how weather played a factor in the sense that the Browns hit their field goal today and the Texans did not.
Like you said, with stuff not showing up in the box score, I even think, I thought arguably this was one of Baker's better games given the circumstances of the weather. He was not bailing in the pocket. Anytime he was faced pressure, he ran forward. And when he threw on the run, he wasn't sailing the ball. So I was very happy with that. He had his huge 3rd down completion to Higgins on the sidelines. He was, a few passes were behind the receiver, but once again, in swirling winds where you couldn't even see when the rain was coming down. So 12 completions, but every single one was through the wind, great passes. His receivers helped him out in a big way. So to me, the fact he played so well in this weather and was accurate spoke volumes. And really today, his main goal was just catching the snap and handing it to both Chubb and Hunt. So I thought this was one of his better games. You can kind of throw out the stats and just, from watching it, the way he composed himself looked just fine to me.
And for whatever reason, he has a really good rapport with Hollywood Higgins. who had 3 receptions, 48 yards on 4 targets today. And that's something that I know OBJ's out, and we're going to mention it time and time and time again. I was seeing some of that on Twitter during today's game of, okay, the Browns don't have a dynamic player who can take the top off of defense quite like OBJ. Certainly the Browns will miss him, but he has a really good rapport with Hollywood Higgins. A lot to what I would compare to a similar rapport that he has with Jarvis Landry. And for whatever reason, and I've talked about it on the show, I know we've both written about it on brownsnation.com, he just never really developed that same connection with OBJ.
Yeah, it truly makes no sense. I've seen several Browns analysts, our site and elsewhere, just can't figure out why it's not working with OBJ. But my other big mystery is, what was Higgins doing last year that Freddie Kitchens was like this, he can't be on our active roster. And even at the start of this year, it is more difficult with Landry and Beckham at the top of the depth chart. But Hodge was showing up above Higgins, and it just appears that whenever Higgins plays, like you said, him and Baker have this amazing chemistry, and they both talk about it too. So it's always been confusing to me why he's not getting more targets. And I think now that OBJ is out, Stefanski is now forced to, utilize this great chemistry that should be being used every week.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Steven, on next week's show, the Browns host the Eagles. We'll both be on the Browns Nation station again. Eagles losers today against the New York Giants. Giants took care of business 27-17 in the dumpster fire that is the NFC East. And so I would imagine the Browns will be favored at home a week from today, but I'm excited to see if the Browns can keep it rolling in another game that they should win.
Yeah, who knows what's going on with the Eagles? They're a team, like today they could get whooped by the Giants, or Carson Wentz will throw for 400 yards. They're the most unpredictable team to me. The Browns should be favored, and once again, like you said, it's a game they should win, and it's not a must win, but I guess every game kind of going down the stretch is somewhat a must win, but it's going to be tough to make a prediction. We're going to have to see what the weather is. And we're going to have to try to really figure out what's going on with the Eagles, because they are, week to week, a totally different team.
And Carson Wentz really struggles to protect the football. It's almost as if he has like the yips now, because this was a guy a few years ago. He was key to the Eagles' Super Bowl run just a few years ago before he got hurt. He was playing at an MVP level. He's never been the same guy since then. And I don't know if he has trepidation because Jalen Hurts is on the bench, waiting in the wings potentially to replace him. But Carson Wentz is not the same dude that we've seen before. Now, I know the Eagles have been banged up a lot. I know they got Alshon Jeffrey back today, but I just don't understand what's up with them. That being said, at 3-5-1, they're still considered the favorite in the NFC East, which makes absolutely no sense to me. Steven, you have the potential of an NFC East team winning 5 games to make the playoffs with the NFL's expanded playoff format. We know for sure 7 teams from each conference will make it. The NFL might expand the playoffs beyond that to add an additional team, so it would be 8 per conference if there are any more cancellations related to the COVID-19 pandemic. So you're going to have a really, really weak NFC East team make the postseason and host a playoff game, which is just crazy to me. But given their struggles, I would imagine that Cleveland will be favored next Sunday.
Yeah, it's one of those weird years where, right now, I see no way an NFC East team even gets 8 wins. So 5 is totally a possibility. It's at least 5, I would hope, with all the head-to-head games remaining. But it's when it happens, people push for playoff reform, but it's not an every year thing. If it was an every year thing, then I could see that happening. I remember in the past, like a 7-9, I believe that Seahawks team or something. This was like a decade ago, but you get that rare year where a 7-9 team makes it. This year, maybe the Eagles have their 5.5 wins to sneak in, or to win the division, actually, not sneak in and get in. So next week, like you said, these games are really crucial too, because, the Browns passed on Deshaun Watson. They passed on, hold on, you have to mark down the time. We have a smoke.
All right, so Steven, you were making your point about the NFC East. We interrupted by the smoke alarm, and I understand, again, the weather in Cleveland right now is just absolutely insane.
Yeah, it's crazy here. Everything going on. A lot of people without power, so I'm just happy I have power right now. But what I was saying is that the Browns passed on Deshaun Watson, they passed on Carson Wentz, and even though this is years removed, this is still a storyline in Cleveland. So they take down Deshaun Watson. He plays well, but he's still on a team that's going nowhere this year. So the next week we say, okay, we're going to compare Baker to Carson Wentz. If Baker once again manages the game well, the whole offense looks better than the Eagles and Wentz. If they're a disaster, then we can finally start to get past these storylines that have hung around because the Browns have been so bad. So it is fun to see these games, these quarterbacks, and the Browns actually taking them down after years and years of second-guessing front office decisions.
100%. 100%. Steven, final thoughts here on the Browns Nation Station, and I'll start. Again, to me, the narrative this afternoon was the dueling banjos routine of Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt and establishing them on the ground and the importance of that in terms of, okay, bad weather. We're also into November now. We're going to get into December. We're going to get in January. A lot of times, the cold weather teams tend to win Super Bowls. That's not always the steadfast rule, but if you look at, by and large, the teams that have won the Super Bowls for the last 20 to 30 years, they tend to be cold weather teams. And it becomes more and more and more important to be able to run the football, especially between, you get to the upper echelon, the elite talent in this team. There's parity. There's really not that much of a difference between the elite to very good teams. There's not. And so the difference a lot of times, it's simple. It's blocking and tackling. And the fact that the Browns have, I would say, 2 of the top 10 running backs in their backfield continue to feed those guys. And I was really just happy to see Nick Chubb come off his knee injury today and be as effective as he was on the ground. I thought that was a huge difference in today's victory over the Houston Texans.
Yeah, and think your point on the postseason, think of that Patriots-Rams Super Bowl where you have the Rams come in as this high-powered offense, and it really comes down to a running game and a defensive battle. So having those 2 running backs is going to be huge later in the season when it keeps getting colder. I mean, I don't think every game's going to be hail and swirling hurricane winds, but if it is, the Browns are luckily set up to do better in that situation than a lot of teams. And I kind of waver on the, kind of cold weather AFC North storyline teams because, sometimes great teams can beat that. Say they come into Cleveland, they're fine, but you are seeing it. I mean, today was a good example of, the Browns looked fine. They likely had the weather reports coming in. They could practice in such conditions, did it 2 weeks ago. And they are set up well moving forward, which is exciting to have meaningful Browns football moving into Thanksgiving.
Moving into Thanksgiving and moving into December once we get into the holiday season as well. Browns, we'll see if they can keep it rolling, improve to 6-3 for the first time since the 2014 season. For Steven Kubitza, I'm Mark Bergin. Thank you for listening to the Browns Nation Station. Go leave us a 5-star review. Please rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. We will see you next week after the Browns and Eagles. Take care, and so long, everyone.